The night was silent and serene, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustling of woodland critters moving through the underbrush. This peace was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. A small squad of men trudged through the thick pine woods. Their flashlights cut through the darkness as they followed the creature's trail. Some of the men were well equipped, armed with high-caliber assault rifles and protective vests, but most carried basic hunting weaponry and gear. Suddenly, they were brought to a halt by the sound of movement. The sound came from around them, from different directions. The men stood in place, aiming their weapons towards the direction they heard sounds of movement. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, but failed to expose whatever was out there, hiding among the trees and shrubs, stalking them. Something was wrong. They all felt it. There was more than one. It began without warning. Before a shot could be fired, one of the men was attacked. He let out a scream that alerted the others before he was dragged down. This was followed by the sound of gunshots and desperate, frantic yelling, which quickly turned into screams as their attackers struck from every direction. The hunters became the prey. Their nightly patrol turned into a slaughter as they were ambushed. Through the carnage, however, one of the men managed to escape and ran into the woods. The screaming and the frantic firing of guns were the last thing Renault heard as he ran through the woods, traversing a maze of pine trees. He desperately tried not to stumble on roots, rocks, or impale himself on any low tree branches. In the dead of night, his guiding light was that of the moon, allowing him to see what was in front of him, although poorly. He eventually had to stop running to catch his breath. He took cover behind the thick trunk of a tree and pressed his back against it. He breathed hard as adrenaline rushed through his veins. His trembling hand searched for his flashlight, which instinctively wanted to turn it on, but he knew he couldn't. Doing so would give him away and be dead in an instant. His fear of the dark didn't help either. "Don't be stupid," he thought, fighting the urge to press the on button. "No, just remain calm. I'll make it home. Just gotta control my nerves and figure out where I am. That's all." Gradually, Renault's breathing started to normalize. He held his flashlight against his chest like a holy relic. The weight of the shotgun slung over his left shoulder felt heavy. Maybe they're gone, he thought with hopeful naivety. Perhaps the others were enough to satiate their hunger. Renault managed to work up the courage, and with hesitation, he peeked around the tree trunk. He saw the moonlight cutting through the pine trees. He heard silence, the natural silence of the woods, the singing of pine crickets, and the sound of his heart beating heavily in his chest. However, before he could feel a sense of relief, he sprung back behind the tree, frozen in fear. In his peripheral vision, he saw something, a quick movement, a tall shadow dashing from behind one tree to another. He now knew what the cause of the silence was. They were waiting for him to make his move before they made theirs, just like a cat playing with an injured mouse. Maybe if I just stay still, they'll go away, he thought, in a cheap attempt to subdue the growing feeling of impending doom that was clawing at his neck. Renault stood there with his back against the tree, eyes shut tight. He hoped he was right. He hoped they would just leave like a bad memory. But then a sound cut through the silence, causing Renault to open his eyes wide. A sound that felt like a sudden shock to the chest. It was the crunching of twigs and pine cones, It was coming from the other side of the tree trunk Reynolds' back was pressed against. One of those things, one of those creatures was taking slow, deliberate steps as it approached him. There was no other option. Reynolds knew this. He could feel them closing in. He could feel their gaze. Reynolds slowly reached for his shotgun and held it with both hands, finger ready on the trigger. Despite the cool night air, Reynolds' face was drenched with sweat. It ran down his forehead and dripped off his chin. Towards Reynolds' left and right, he saw them. They were closing in. These unholy, demonic creatures approached Reynolds slowly, in a crouched position, ready to pounce at him the moment he moved. Their blood-red eyes were on him, unblinking, unmoving. The creature on the left had a wide grin, displaying a row of sharp teeth. They had long, narrow humanoid bodies, like an amalgamation between a human and some beast from the depths of hell. His legs and hands trembled. His heart beat away non-stop as if about to explode. Reynolds closed his eyes and managed to take a deep breath, still clutching his shotgun tight. In those few seconds that felt like an eternity, Reynolds made his choice. Against every ounce of self-preservation he had, against every fiber of his being, Reynolds let out a yell while simultaneously aiming his gun at one of the creatures. One gunshot rang out through the woods of Ravenmoor, and then there was silence. A deer moved about the pine trees, sniffing the ground for food and munching on whatever it found tasty. It soon emerged from the forest, walking out onto a solid surface, its hooves making a light tapping sound. It was a winding woodland road, dimly lit by moonlight. Its pavement was cracked, and its white center dividing line was somewhat faded. From a bird's eye view, the road had notable curves, which widened at the curve's apex. The deer was about to fully cross, but suddenly it stopped. Its deer ears stood on point, and its head snapped to the side, eyes wide open. It sensed a disturbance in the silence that its naturally prey senses could detect. There was vibration in the ground, which grew steadily. Off in the distance, the rugged humming sound of a motor emerged. A single bright light emerged around the road's curve. It was that of a motorcycle, speeding at high velocity down the woodland road. Far behind it emerged a pair of headlights. They belonged to a police cruiser. Its red and blue emergency lights flashing, its siren blaring, and its engine roaring as it summoned the speed necessary to keep up with the fleeing motorcyclist. Despite the winding road's curves, the motorcyclists kept their speed consistent, turning their head back to see if they'd lost the cop. But to their annoyance, the cruiser remained steady on their tail, its blinding headlights reflecting off the moto helmet's visor. Officer Sergeant Shelley expertly maneuvered the road's curves and turns, with both hands firmly on the steering wheel, adjusting the vehicle's speed as necessary. The motorcyclist desperately swerved in a serpentine fashion in an attempt to pull off some maneuver to lose the cruiser. Shelley, on the other hand, was trying to place her vehicle in the right position to perform a PIT maneuver to take the motorcyclist down. She was determined to bring this pursuit to an end. She wouldn't let him get away, not again. That was the only thing on her mind. Another curve approached, and again, the motorcyclist thought this one might be it. This one would be his lucky break. He cut the corner as close to the side as possible, his knee almost scraping the concrete. However, on the other side of the curve, the bike's headlight relieved a deer standing on the road, standing motionless like a statue. The motorcyclist let out a short, startled yell and swerved at the last minute to avoid the animal, causing him to lose control. He dashed to the left side of the road, crashed into a tree. The collision sent him flying like a rag doll. Startled, the deer scampered into the woods. Shelley's cruiser arrived shortly after, coming to a screeching stop as Shelley slammed the brakes, the cruiser's headlight illuminating the motorcycle wreck. Shelley spoke to dispatch through her car radio, quickly updating them on the situation and her current location. She then opened the vehicle door and exited, revolver and flashlight at the ready. Standing behind the driver door, Shelley cautiously scanned the area with her flashlight. Seeing no movement, she shut the vehicle's door and made her way to the motorcycle that lay toppled, with smoke coming from the motor, on the verge of igniting. The biker, however, wasn't there. Shelley noticed a helmet not too far off. She kneeled down to examine it. It had some blood, and the visor was damaged, probably broken when the biker bashed their face against the tree. If he's alive, he can't be too far, Shelley thought to herself as she dropped the moto helmet. She took a good look around before entering the woods. Shelley made her way through the woods, weaving through trees while paying attention to sounds in her surroundings. While her flashlight lit the way in front of her, the main sound was the crunching of leaves and twigs as her boot pressed against the ground. Shelley paused momentarily as a new sound caught her ear. It was the unmistakable sound of gunfire. The shots came from off in the distance, north of her location. Shelley was familiar with the sound. The gunshots were a combination of shotgun and rifle fire. Hunters, Shelley thought. But why did their firing sound frantic? Shelley took a deep breath and refocused her attention on the current matter at hand. Suddenly, Shelley heard the crack of a gunshot and saw a flash some distance in front of her. A bullet whizzed past her head, missing by inches, impacting a tree behind her. Shelley quickly threw herself against the floor and quickly rolled to the side, taking cover behind a tree. "Big mistake, buddy," Shelley muttered as she turned her flashlight off. Without a light, she'd be hard to spot. She took a peek around the side of the tree trunk. Another gunshot rang. The bullet hit the tree Shelley was behind. The gun's muzzle flash gave away the biker's position. Shelley took a deep breath and made a quick dash, relocating herself to a more favorable position while evading 2 more shots from the biker. She relocated behind another tree, flanking the biker. Shelley had an idea. She turned on her flashlight and threw it. The biker instantly fired in its direction, leaving him open. Shelley took that opening, firing 3 rounds from her revolver. One of them hit. The biker let out an agonizing scream, clutching his right arm. Then he began to flee. Shelley tried to take aim, but his weaving between the trees, plus the low visibility, made it difficult to land a shot. Shelley retrieved her flashlight and continued the chase. While on the move, she reloaded her revolver, plugging the rounds in one by one. The 2 ran through the woods, reaching a part where the terrain sloped upwards. The chase continued uphill. Shelley lost her footing traveling up the sloping terrain, but she quickly regained her balance and continued. By the time she reached the top of the hill, she heard more gunfire. Shelley was ready to duck for cover. The gunshots weren't directed at her. 4 consecutive shots were heard, which were followed by a scream. A scream that was abruptly cut short. What the hell? Shelley thought, staring in the direction the scream came from. Shelley listened intently for a few seconds. Only silence ensued. A silence so thick, it felt tangible. Shelley proceeded cautiously, body tense, revolver at the ready. Shelley saw something shine under the light of her flashlight. Upon closer inspection, what she saw stopped her. On the floor, laying among the leaves, was a dismembered right hand, still clutching a handgun with the finger on the trigger. Shelley was a seasoned officer who had seen her fair share of blood, so this didn't faze her. However, what alarmed her was what the dismembered hand meant. It alluded to the fact that she wasn't alone in these woods. Something else was there. Buddy ran into a bear. Shelley tried to reason. But where's the body? And the bear? Kneeling, Shelley scanned the area around her with her flashlight, but then a sound caught her ear, a sound coming from a few meters away. Shelley stood up and took slow, cautious steps in the sound's direction. After traveling a few meters, Shelley reached a small clearing, an area with no trees, and a clear, open sky view above. In the center of the clearing was the biker, but he wasn't alone. There were 3 creatures crouching next to his body, devouring him. Shelley's eyes struggled to make out what she was seeing, but it was now clear what the sound was. It was the ripping and tearing of human flesh, the breaking and gnawing of bones. Shelley turned her flashlight off. These creatures, whatever they were, she didn't want to alert them of her presence. She didn't want to add herself to their midnight feast. Without facing away, Shelley took slow, cautious steps backwards, one step at a time. The creatures ate ravenously, but one of them, the larger one, seemed to pause, as if it sensed something. While holding blood-dripping intestines in its hands, it raised its snout upward, as if sniffing the air. Much to Shelley's dread, the creature turned its head, lowering its snout downwards in Shelley's direction. Its eyes locked with Shelley's eyes. Shelley stood still, unable to move, sweat dripping down her chin. The creature then formed a wide, hellish grin as its eyes narrowed on Shelley. The other 2 creatures hadn't noticed yet. What happened next? It happened so fast it felt like one quick motion. The creature dropped the biker's intestines and charged at Shelley without warning. But Shelley managed to blind the creature by spraying pepper spray into its eyes, while also moving out of the way, dodging its attack. Shelley then unloaded her revolver in the creature's head and chest, causing the creature to fall over, slamming back first against a tree. Shelley then began to run, wasting no time looking back at the other 2 creatures. Shelley ran, making her way through the trees while trying to reload her revolver. But she struggled. Her sweaty hands, the adrenaline rushing through her veins, and the sound of death behind her made it much more difficult. Suddenly, Shelley remembered the biker's gun. In the dark, it would be hard to find, but luckily she remembered where it was. She had no time to waste. She could hear them close behind her, their fast footsteps, their heavy breathing. They were gaining on her fast. Shelley made it to the place she last saw the gun, and there it was, its metal body shining under the moonlight. With no hesitation, Shelley launched herself towards it. She grabbed it and rolled, placed herself in an upright kneeling position, ready to fire. But the creatures weren't there. They were hiding. Shelley flicked on her flashlight and scanned the surrounding trees, gun aimed. They were nowhere in sight, but she could hear them. Shelley stood up and took slow steps backwards, while still aiming her gun and flashlight. Her plan was to make her way back to the cruiser. There she could radio for help. Just as Shelley was about to reach the hill slope and start descending, one of the creatures made its move. Concealed by the dark, it made a quick dash, flanking Shelley's left side. Hearing its footsteps, Shelley turned, aiming in its direction. She managed to fire 2 shots, but they missed. This time they got her. Its claws slashed Shelley's chest armor, cutting deep. She fell backwards and rolled violently down the hill. Upon reaching the bottom landing face down on her stomach, Shelley felt disoriented. She felt warm blood training down her face. She felt the burn from the lacerations on her chest. She managed to push herself over to lay on her back. And then she saw them, the 3 of them. They stood in front of her, standing upright. Tall, narrow humanoid creatures with wolf-like features. A wolf-like head and teeth, but no fur, just a dark gray skin that blended well with the dark of night. Their unblinking, blood-red eyes were focused on Shelley. The tall one only had one eye, the other eye damaged when Shelley blasted it in the face. grinning widely, saliva dripping from their wide grin that displayed rows of sharp canine teeth. They approached her. They approached slowly as if savoring the moment. However, despite the odds, despite the wounds, Shelley smiled and let out a chuckle. She lost her gun in the fall, but she hadn't lost her spirit. She had one more weapon. In front of her, she held an unfolded pocket knife, holding it tightly, aiming it at the creatures. "Come at me, bitch," Shelley said, with a strong defiance in her voice. Suddenly, the creature's advance was brought to a halt by a sound that even caught Shelley's attention. It was a chuckle, an amused chuckle that was followed by a raspy, deep, mocking voice. "I've been dying for a little chaos. You boys will do just fine." The three creatures' gaze switched from Shelley, who lay on the ground, still holding her knife, to a tall, ominous stranger standing there on the opposite side. The stranger wore a long black trench coat. His face was concealed by the rim of a worn-out preacher's hat. The three creatures began to hiss and groan, their gaze locked on the stranger, forgetting completely about Shelley. The stranger lifted his gaze. Although the darkness hid his face, his eyes stood out notably. Two bright red eyes, like windows into hell itself. The stranger stared at the three hellish creatures who stood in front of him, and then at Shelley, who laid on the ground. Then the stranger, with an amused grin on his face, spoke. "Three devils against a guy with a gun." The stranger revealed a sawed-off shotgun hidden underneath his trench coat, now brandishing it, aiming the barrel at the creatures. One of the three creatures, the leader, let out a roar and charged the stranger. The stranger grinned wider. "This will be fun."